Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session on the role of academic integrity in international student success. My name is Natalie Rudner, Director of Academics at Rosedale International Education, and I'm very excited to be here this morning with our panel of international educators to discuss how we can support our students in upholding academic integrity as they make the transition from high school to higher education. Over the next 45 minutes, we're going to hear from our three panelists who have various roles in higher education, but are intimately familiar with the challenges related to academic integrity and how we can support student success. First, I would like to welcome Amanda McKenzie, Director of Quality Assurance for Academic Programs at the University of Waterloo here in Canada, and an officer on the Board of Directors for the International Centre for Academic Integrity. Next, I welcome Dr. Eleanor Parker, Head of Learning Development at King's College London in the UK. And finally, I'd like to welcome Dr. Samantha Clark, Senior Lecturer in Educational Innovation Team at the University of Sydney in Australia. So welcome. I'm very excited to have you all here today to talk about a topic that I know is very near and dear to our hearts, which is academic integrity, but more importantly, helping our students be successful as they transition from high school to university. So I'm going to begin with Amanda. In your role as Director of Quality Assurance, you oversee the academic practices at Waterloo. You're also very active, involved with the International Centre for Academic Integrity and its Canadian chapter here in Canada. Can you please tell us a little bit more about what role you play and the work that you've done to support both the university and other institutions in establishing that culture of academic integrity?
Absolutely. Thanks, Natalie. Well, I began in probably almost 10 years ago now working with academic integrity, and I had no real background or information about the field when I first started. And I quickly got up to speed by connecting myself through people at the University of Waterloo, but also reaching out to people in my local province in Canada, and specifically attending the annual conference for the International Centre for Academic Integrity. And over the years, attending that conference, I became more and more interested in being part and active in that group. It helped form the Canadian branch of the International Centre for Academic Integrity. And through those connections, I really learned more about great best practices that I could bring back to my home university at Waterloo. Lots of different ideas. Of course, there was people who were very active in the field and conducting cutting edge research. So that exposure and just really networking with people who were experiencing the same situations that I was really helped me grow and change my thinking of what things that I would like to do at the University of Waterloo. Primarily, the office that I manage in academic integrity is educational and promotional. We don't do any of the investigations for academic misconduct or offenses, which is great. So we get to focus on the good things. We really highlight focusing on the 6 fundamental values that the International Centre promotes because they're basic, right? There's honesty, trust, respect, fairness, responsibility, and courage. And those are pretty simple. I think everyone can relate to those. So some of our campaigns across campus for both faculty, staff, and anyone else on campus, students, of course, was really unpacking what these values are and how we can demonstrate those values. So a lot of the work that we've done has focused on those values, putting them into action. We've also developed a number of learning resources. So I received some funding from a provincial agency to do training modules for our undergraduate students. And we made them on a mobile app at first. The mobile app is now morphed into an online version, but it's still available. And it focuses on real life situations and how the values come into play and how students will go through their decision making. So that's been really successful. We've also done a second round of funding that I received for that was modules for students in STEM, which was pretty unique because obviously students who are in the humanities and arts and are writing more often seem to have a bit more experience in academic integrity and what the scholarship rules are. Whereas students in STEM who are less doing essays and writing seem to be a little less prepared in that sense. So these new modules are free, they're available online, and they can be easily tailored to other people's circumstances and educational institutions. So excited to have created these resources that can be shared with other people. Again, they're generic, so both sets can be adapted to anyone's content around the world. And again, just keeping on my activity with the International Center, working with those colleagues to keep my creative juices flowing as to new ways that I can really reach out and engage everyone on our campus to promote integrity.
Oh, thank you. That's I know I'm familiar with some of the work that you've done around academic integrity in the modules, and they are very, very handy and very useful. And we'll talk a little bit more about, some of the things that lie within those modules and the skills that students need to work on a little bit later. So I'd like to invite Eleanor, in your role as head of learning development. I know that you're interacting a lot with the students and helping them prepare for transition to academic life at university. So can you tell us a little bit about sort of your role and how you help our students or help students make that transition, and what types of resources you've developed for students and staff at King's College?
Thanks so much, Natalie. So in my role, we see the academic integrity piece as part of broader work to empower our undergraduate and master's students to really take ownership of development of their academic skills and independent learning skills that will enable, we hope, their student success. So some of the kinds of ways we do that at King's College London in my team, we like to provide quite flexible ways for students to engage in this topic. In my services, we offer the opportunity to engage in it for all taught students. So we have open access resources and activities, and they are threefold. We have, similar to what Amanda's developed and the amazing work she's done, we have developed our own context-specific online learning module around understanding academic integrity. Building on that, we also find that actually discussion and dialogue around this is really important. So we provide live opportunities for students to engage in this topic. So we run a series of group workshops where students will either be sharing strategies and that decision making that Amanda talked about with their peers, often from other disciplines, but sometimes also in really bespoke work we will do inside a curriculum. And then finally, my area leads a one-to-one personalized opportunity for students to explore this through appointments that they can book with one of our tutors, and exploring academic integrity really in the broader context of what's going on in their academic writing is something that we'll see students often come to those appointments with. But we've developed those resources very much with students, educators and curriculum needs in mind, and also in really close dialogue with officers like Amanda's, and also with our colleagues who deal with those student cases. But we get the real joy and privilege in being able to explore this with students and educators in a really supportive and developmental way, rather than, I guess, the slightly more dangerous but inevitable punitive angle that some of my colleagues face. Thank you.
Thank you, Eleanor. And it's very exciting to hear about the initiatives at universities where they're really working to support students. And what I'm appreciating both through Amanda and through what you've been saying is the approach to, like, that positive approach to dealing with academic integrity issues as opposed to the punitive. I think that, we all recognize that it's really an area for growth for our students, and we need to be able to support that. So Samantha, you have a slightly different role, I think, at the university, and that you actually work with the educators as in your Department of Leadership and Educational Innovations. So can you tell us a little bit about the work that you do at University of Sydney around, supporting our educators and the students around the area of academic integrity and skills?
Yeah, no, thank you, Natalie, and thank you everyone for having me. So at the University of Sydney, my role sits in the central portfolio within the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Education, and within the Educational Innovation team, we're tasked with supporting all educators across the university to operationalize the university's educational strategies through supporting educational technologies, staff development, and sort of dealing with the challenges such as academic integrity that are sort of facing our educators, and how to look at it in that sort of positive, with that positive bent. And so a big part of my role actually involves working with these educators, whether they be academic staff or professional staff that have contact with students, and looking at things about, you know, improving students' transition to university, setting up mechanisms directly within units and courses about how to talk about academic integrity and deal with the challenges, but with that sort of positive spin on things. So, and helping to build those connections between students and educators, designed for integrity in the units in which they're teaching within, so that it's something that is set up before they even see the students, and it's sort of, we're addressing it before we even get to having things like academic integrity breaches. And it also involves sort of training and working with the educators and running CPD courses around how to sort of approach this with that sort of positive spin on it. And while we within educational innovation sort of deal with that curricular side of things, sort of working on curriculum and unit development and designing for integrity, we also work very closely with our co-curricular team, which is the student life, and have programs set up around sort of peer mentoring and other support systems, and that sort of we all work together and kind of address in that way, sort of that holistic way, and again trying to keep that positive spin going. So I'll leave it there for the moment. And yeah.
Okay, thank you. Absolutely. I think, you know, our students are lucky when they end up at institutions that have the wonderful programs, and I hope they take advantage of them. So I'm really excited to have sort of the three of you here today, because you all bring a very unique perspective from, you know, your various roles at your institutions. And but before we get into sort of having some more conversation, I want to just take a few minutes just to acknowledge the fact that in our audience today, not only do we have educators from universities around the world, but we also have students attending from Rosedale Global High School. And so they will be listening with great interest, I think, to what you have to say around academic integrity. And I want to sort of, you know, just before we begin, maybe just quickly review what we're talking about in a university context around academic integrity, just very briefly. So Amanda, I'm going to start with you, just because you have you're very involved with the Academic Center for Academic Integrity worldwide, and you mentioned already the 6 fundamental values of academic integrity, which are honesty, trust, fairness, respect, responsibility, and courage. So what would that look like from a student perspective or a faculty perspective for a student coming in? You know, what are they expecting from our students?
That's a really good question. And I think the values, when we talk about integrity, a lot of people just don't know what that academic integrity or integrity means. So I tend to focus on the values because they're easier to digest. And on our campus, we've spent time really trying to give some tangible examples of what that looks like. Less so for faculty, because I think they have a bit better of an understanding, but there's certainly more work to be done in that area. So for us, we focus on, our website has some detailed examples under each value about how a student can demonstrate that. So for example, responsibility, making sure that you're getting your work done on time and handing it in. Respect, attending classes and obeying or following your instructor's instructions. Honesty, being honest with yourself, making sure that you're being original with your work and truthful to others. So there's lots of ways that we try to help. I think despite all the campaigns and lovely things that we have with modules and things, I think the most important fact is for instructors and students and anyone else who's got a close relationship with the student to really just have a conversation about what the expectations are and how they can act with integrity and these values when they're conducting not only their academics, but also in their other parts of their lives, you know, whether they're on sports teams or within their family and friends. So there's lots of things and conversations, and we know that that's the most impactful way to get through to students is to really have those conversations, and role modeling as well is very important.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to go out on a limb. I think most of us are really familiar with, if people talk about academic dishonesty, we immediately jump to thinking about plagiarism and cheating and things like that. But I know, that, and from conversations we've had previously and work through the Center for Academic Integrity, that most cases of academic dishonesty are actually sort of unintentional. So, they're not necessarily, kids aren't going out to specifically cheat or be dishonest. It's because they just don't, they're either not aware or So Eleanor, I was wondering, what are some of those things, and maybe what are some of the drivers that lead students to do things unintentionally that they should be aware of? And what does that look like for our students?
Thanks, Natalie. I think really building on Amanda's point, we'll often be talking to students about this in the context of that idea of taking responsibility for your learning. And I think on the most simple level, it's about getting them to reflect on where their information comes from, how they use it, and how they work with others. So I think particularly in a new learning environment, how collaborative learning happens in your new university will be a really important question to ask, even before you apply to your program. How will I be asked to work with others? And what are the challenges and opportunities in that? So I think we will often, students will jump to that idea of plagiarism first. But we're often extending and exploring the conversation around working with others in group assessments, on maybe a group project or a group presentation. We'll also be really helping to define the boundaries for students within our policies and supportive practices around what kind of services are out there and which ones are genuine, which ones are provided by us as institutions to guide, help, support, enrich the students' lives, but actually how do we help students discern the difference between other types of services which often, unfortunately, market themselves very much like us, but which may actually result in a breach of our academic honesty and integrity policy. So using an outside service. So it's kind of, where does your information come from? How can you make sure it's cited and referenced correctly? How do you work with others? And how, more broadly, and where do you get that help from? I think some of the underlying reasons are often actually broader. They can be around students' experience of transition in terms of managing their studies. There will often be, for example, in our context, we'll be talking a lot to students about the volume and type of reading they'll be doing, and also just how to engage with a different type of source, a different type of information maybe than they've been used to seeing. So often underlying a lot of the cases might be that broader management issue, including of their time and of their new set of learning responsibilities. And we often see, therefore, that academic integrity is very, very rarely, a breach of it is very rarely a case on its own. There is nearly always something going on for that student's broader well-being, their experience of student life, or their experience of learning.
Thank you for that. And Samantha, from an educator perspective, what are some of the challenges that your educators come to you with saying, my students are doing X, Y, and Z, or what are some of the issues that arise from the educator perspective?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I guess some of the really key things that jump out just as like really quick sort of bullet point type of answers to this question that come again and again. It's that poor understanding of referencing and just knowing how to, how to attribute what where this information is coming from. One of the other big things that comes through and is this idea of self-plagiarism and the fact that that's a thing. You can't just lift something from an assignment that you've written previously and turn it in as a new one. That's another one that our academics often come to try and get support on. Very much into what Amanda and Eleanor were talking about as well, is it's not understanding, the students not understanding the requirements of the assessment, and so working with them to help their students understand better around what's going on. And often we find, coming back to the referencing one, that's a really interesting point. What we're working with academics to try and do is try to reframe that idea of referencing around not getting hung up on the particulars of a particular style and being really nitty gritty around that, but have really simple discussions with their students around why do we reference? And then it's sort of bringing in those ideas that Eleanor was just talking about, that it's actually a really important thing to, attribute where you're getting this source from. And building on the work of others. And how would you feel if you were out working with, clients or in a clinic and those sorts of things, and you're having, you need to know where your information's coming from. And so having those discussions with the students. And so I think that they're the key things that really come through strongly over and over again from our educators, and just working with them to design assessments and look at these issues of integrity in a different way is really being quite a positive sort of spin change to addressing this challenge, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, it's nice to hear the emphasis on sort of the why you need to reference, the why you need to do that, because I think that, at the end of the day, yes, there's all these formats, but I mean, if you look now, there's, I don't know how many different formats of formatting and different subjects, different courses, and, that just becomes an editorial piece at the end, right? Where you put the right punctuation in, but it's what information do you need to share about the source that you've used. I think that's the most critical piece, and something that I've been learning over the years as we work with students to try to help them master that. So I guess, so we know that students get themselves into hot water a little bit, time management, not necessarily knowing clear expectations, what's expected and things like that, and stress and all of those pieces. But what can we do to support and raise awareness? So I think, Amanda, October 19th is actually the International Day Against Contract Cheating. And I know that at Rosedale last year, we sort of took the lead from some of the other institutions that held sort of academic integrity awareness events. And we hosted an academic integrity awareness month to help our students recognize sort of what academic integrity meant and the values and why it's important and why we believe in it as a school. So what is the role of those, those types of events, and what is the hope, I guess, around something like the International Day Against Contract Cheating?
Yeah, it's an exciting day. I have to put a little plug in for that for the October 19th. There's a number of live web events that are going to be held that day. And the International Center for Academic Integrity has a webpage dedicated to the International Day of Action, which has resources and examples, not only for instructors, but also people who are looking to do certain events on their campus to mark this day and recognize it, just to give them some different ideas of what they can do. The day is really just to raise awareness. And I know we've focused on contract cheating for many years now. Not everyone understands the term. So I think for the organization, focusing more on how we support integrity and encourage students to work with integrity is important. Part of that piece, as what Eleanor was saying, is really to make students aware of what resources are available and the appropriate resources. Because everything is so accessible online, it's hard for students to really discern what is a valid tool to help them and what it crosses the line between getting too much help. So unpacking that is really important. And of course, there are people that just still don't know about these things. So the more and more we talk about it, the better. So this day is really just to highlight opening a conversation, making people aware, and encouraging them to uphold integrity.
Excellent. I look forward to it and checking out some of the events. I think one of the things I know, as a high school, we're obviously making steps in trying to really help our students uphold that academic integrity and work continuously. But what would you like to see for a K-12 school working to prepare their students for university? What steps would you like K-12 schools to take, or what would be helpful in helping prepare the transitions, especially when we're talking about our international students who might be coming from various different backgrounds into, your institutions? What would be helpful, perhaps something that maybe is already in place that has proven to be helpful, and that maybe other institutions can consider, or that high schools can consider in putting into place, or something that maybe your dream of what would be the perfect situation for that transition. And Samantha, I'm going to ask you to start with that.
So what could cater? I guess the thing that with this process is start the conversation early, I guess, and as a coming from, I've worked with some of the transition pieces that we've been doing over the last couple of years to really improve that for our students, particularly our international students coming to our institution. And the really key thing is to have that set up right from the beginning, get people talking about it, get educators talking about it in the beginning, have those really contextualized things and conversations going on. One other thing that we've been doing as well is trying to involve, particularly for students who perhaps don't have the support mechanisms in place. They might have older brothers or sisters that have gone through university, those sort of things, is to involve communities and parents in the discussions as well. And so we've developed a series of online resources that explain these issues from a parent's perspective, or a supportive other person who's helping these students come through. And so it's part of that broad conversation. And I guess the last thing before I hand over to my other panelists here for this question is the contextualized part of the discussion is really important. We're finding when we're building that relationship coming through. So it's not just this broad sort of, yes, academic integrity is important, but it's important for scientists or medicine, people coming through, and so students can really connect with that message when they're coming to the institution and seeing themselves as these professionals as their journey through the university and on into their careers beyond.
Yeah. Eleanor, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, Natalie, there's a really exciting opportunity for K through 12 schools to think about this topic more when they're working with their sort of partnerships with higher education institutions. We often think about subject taster days or sessions, maybe an online talk that you're organising with a department to get students interested in or engaged in a particular subject. I may be giving my colleagues in departments a hard task here, but make the request. Say, could you talk about a medical dissertation with this lens? Could you talk about what it means to be a sociology scholar? How do you use information in sociology, or whatever it might be? So I think there's a lot more that we could and should be doing across this divide, and in some of those actual transition activities that schools and universities partner in. Very often the relationships are only with recruitment or admissions teams, and I'd love to see us do even more with colleagues in our types of roles. I think the other idea, which I saw work really, really well at a previous institution in the UK where I worked at the University of Bath, is for the schools to build on the excellent examples of some of the kind of stuff Amanda was saying for the International Day Against Contract Cheating. So getting student competitions going, in finding meaningful ways to fit it in to your community's activities, to get a dialogue going. Because also what you do then is you find out where your students are at. You find out what they're worried about, what they're driven by. You find out a lot about their understanding. So in a previous role, I did a lot of student partnered blogging, vlogging, even podcasts around a broader range of academic skills topics, actually. But academic integrity is absolutely one of those topics that could be included in hopefully already in your curriculum, but maybe in some of those broader community-based activities too.
Thank you. And so, I think they're all fantastic suggestions. And as I'm listening, I'm like, oh, we're going to look out at Rosedale and try to implement some of those and work with some of our partners in higher ed to make that happen. But I think I want to go back to something that Samantha talked about a little bit earlier when we were talking about some of the challenges that our educators have. And this sort of has to do with the teaching and learning aspect around academic integrity. And we know one of the constant challenges is the assessment. It's creating the authentic learning assessments that actually allow students to complete the work and make it, I wouldn't say difficult, but make it less likely for students to try and cut corners and maybe do things that they shouldn't be doing. So what advice do you have for educators when they're designing, assessment tasks to minimize sort of incidences of academic integrity? What can we do? And, is there anything that's particularly effective in that area?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And I guess when we talk to staff and in our, when we're talking on the one-on-one and in our CPD courses, we have sort of 3 key strategies that we promote when we're trying to design for integrity and address this issue. And the first one we've touched on quite a lot is, have those discussions with students and start that early and, talk about preventing plagiarism and what it actually looks like and what it means. So that's the first strategy. The second really big one speaks to this question quite strongly, and it's designing for integrity. Know your students, who's in there. Have constructive alignment in the type of assessments that you're doing throughout. Make them iterative, build on other pieces of work, and so the things that you're getting your students to do are connected. They're working on feedback that you've given, they're meaningful for your students. You're building on either class activities, so you do something in class as a group and then take that away and build on that into your assessment. Use different modes. Multimodal assessment is a really good way to change things up and make it harder to have those instances of integrity issues coming through. When you're thinking about sustainability in terms of designing for integrity, strategize what outcomes you're looking to assess and, what types of assessments will really pull out the learning outcomes and assess the students in the way that you need to, but in a sustainable way. I think it was Eleanor that was mentioning before, make explicit design for collaboration in the types of assessments that you're building. And so that's a good way to sort of combat what's going on. And then another one, I saw this on a Twitter or an EdSurge post or something in the last couple of years that was a really nice approach. I mean, we can all talk about authentic assessment and that's a really nice way, but there's been quite a lot of literature coming out that it's not using that on its own or using reflection on its own is not super effective. When it becomes effective is when you use a sort of Swiss cheese approach. So you use all different types of assessments, so multimodal, authentic assessment, reflective practices. And so the ways that you're creating the opportunity to sort of engage in the practices that we want to avoid is becoming a lot more difficult. And so taking on different types of assessments in the way that you assess, I think is a really good way that, and then the research is sort of supporting that as well. And so I think a mix of those, constructive alignment, iterative, different types of assessments, collaborative types of ways of building those is probably my best collection in a short amount of time to talk about. But I think that's what I'd go with, and I'd be interested to hear what Amanda and Eleanor, if they have any other ideas too coming through.
Good, thank you. So those are, great suggestions, and I think that really opens up, opportunities for both our students and our educators. And I think it actually makes assessment a lot more easy, much more interesting for students. Amanda, yes. Do you have anything else that you wanted to add to that, or?
I would just say I know the metaphor that Samantha's talking about and have seen that image of the Swiss cheese, and I would fully support a holistic approach, and just, I guess, making educators aware that students get into situations because of other stressors in their lives, right? So it's not that they are a bad student, that they want to cheat to get ahead, but usually there's other pressures, especially an international student trying to acculturate and acclimatize to new country, new school, new friends, new food, right? All the things that they're not used to. So I think some recognition of instructors about the other things that could be impacting international students and connecting them with the resources. I liked how Eleanor said about figuring out where your students are at and then building from there. But also when you recognize a gap, passing them on to your writing and writing centers, tutors, other available things, so they get the support that they need early on. I think that's a really important piece.
Thank you. And Eleanor, earlier you mentioned, the idea of skills modules and sort of one-on-one sessions and things that with students. What skills would you say are the specific ones that, would really be of particular importance for our international students as they transition to higher ed?
Wow, that's a whole other webinar. But I think in summary, I would say I see a lot of it gravitating around, for my system where I'm working in the UK higher ed sector, we talk a lot about the transition to independent learning and what that means. I would say a key part of that, though it will mean something different in every discipline, will be this idea of critical thinking, critically engaging with your learning. It is the term that is most often used in the higher level marking rubrics and least often understood or sort of jointly understood by students and educators. So we will often be working with students where we get them to mark samples of previous cohorts' work. We will ask them to engage actively with the rubric. How are you understanding that term? And we will stage a dialogue with the educators and the students to say, actually, this is the grade it got, and this is why. It's really, really important that students understand the rationale behind that. But in summary, if you said I had to say one thing, I would say critical thinking.
Does anybody else have anything else to add? Any other ones that jump out? I think.
Sorry, I was just happy if I jump in. Okay, thank you. I guess one other thing, really talking about that and engaging with your students and building on that, evaluative judgment side of things, but also talking to your students about, if we think about, we know that being overly policed is not working, and so that sort of the three things that are really triggering students is, the pressure that we talked about and the incentive to cheat, having those opportunities, so designing out those opportunities hopefully, and then so having those conversations around rationalizing and what it is that rationalizes and what cheating behaviors look like, or academic integrity breach behaviors look like, and having those really explicit conversations. And we often find when our academics report back that they've had those conversations, they go, we talked about it, and students couldn't understand, or we surfaced that students didn't understand that by going to the learning centre that is specifically set up by us is a different thing than going out and finding some quite unknown and slightly dodgy things. So talking about how they're rationalising where they're sourcing this support from, I think was one other thing that I just wanted to add there. I thought that would connect with what's been said. Thank you.
Perfect. So I think those are excellent, excellent skills. And I think the emphasis on critical thinking, I think, is really something that schools, especially in that transition piece, right? Making sure that our students understand what critical thinking is, and at least giving some of the tools and some of the ways to go about doing that. And I know we started doing that. That was a big area for us at Rosedale, where, our teachers and our students were saying, well, I don't know what you mean by critical thinking. So we've actually developed much thanks to Amanda and the work that they've done at Waterloo, sort of develop some skills modules for our students to help with that. And we're hoping that will help our students and better prepare them as they prepare for university. But we're running out of time. And so I want to wrap up. We could speak, I know, for days probably on this topic. But as I mentioned previously, we do have our Rosedale Global High School students and some of their teachers, their parents and caregivers with them here today. And, as we prepare students for, pursuing their international education, and, 100% of our kids are hoping to attend a university elsewhere, and most of them will. In fact, I think last year we had almost 100% of our students receive offers. So we're really excited about that. But what would be the one tip? So if I can get one tip around academic integrity and making that transition to high school that you would share with our students so that they can be successful in their pursuits next year. So Amanda, actually I'm going to start with Eleanor. Eleanor, I'm going to start with you and then we'll just go around. So just a quick tip for our students.
Thanks, Natalie. Engage with all the activities your incoming university has lovingly prepared for you, but also crucially, ask your peer mentor or peer learning scheme, ask another student, how has this actually worked for you? What do you wish you'd known? And that could be the same right before even application if you're working with student representatives or student ambassadors in your liaison with universities.
Okay, thank you. Amanda?
It wouldn't be fair if I said that Eleanor plagiarized my answer, but I would say ask lots of questions as well. And I really like the idea that it's a group think, not only sourcing information from like one area, but your instructors are there. There's advisors that are there, even going back to your family and talking about, if you're struggling, again, that holistic part is just if you need support to reach out and don't be afraid to ask questions.
Thank you. And Samantha?
Very similar vein to what I was going to say as well, but I guess take the time to find out the key places to go and talk to people to find that support, because often when you arrive at university, it's a big, overwhelming place, and there is support out there. Most or all institutions will have it somewhere, but it might be hard to find. But if you just take a little bit of time to find where those support networks are, those the ones that are there designed to help you, build that into your arsenal of approaching when it gets a bit hard or you need help with something, because they are there and they want to help you and you can do it. So, yeah, find those people.
That's great. And I really love the emphasis on, the emphasis on growth and learning and, understanding that you don't have all the answers and that you might get stuck, but that there is support out there. And so to take advantage of that support and use it to your advantage as well. And I would be remiss because we do have a lot of educators in the audience today as well. So what would be the one tip for educators, either K-12 or university, in helping build that culture of integrity and helping students transition from the high school to the university level? Sam, we'll start with you.
Okay, all right. I guess I'll come back to the point that I raised very briefly earlier, but start the conversation early and have those contextualized conversations around what this big concept of academic integrity is and what it looks like specific for the students in the context in which they're using it, and so that you're deepening that understanding, get to know them, connect it to what is important to them, and keep having those conversations.
Okay, thank you. Eleanor?
I think we have it, for example, linked in our whole university community charter that students see right when they kind of sign up and register. But I think, so I'd like to see it in institution level kind of educator and departmental program level commitments, but really it's got to trickle all the way down. So if the college or the university says these values are important, take the time in your orientation program with your students to explore and explain what that might mean for you, for your program, for your discipline.
Thank you. And Amanda?
I totally echo everything Samantha and Eleanor have said. I would only add to that in universities might want to consider adding in some required resources or modules that would set people on the right path when they come into the institution. So some of the resources that Natalie, you've worked with and adapted to Rosedale, other universities could do the same to make sure that everyone has a foundational understanding. And I think if you put those front and center and continue to keep messaging, not only as soon as they arrive, but throughout, that's really impactful as well.
Well, thank you for those words of advice. And I would just like to thank our panelists for what has been an absolutely fascinating discussion and I think really inspiring in the sense that I think that anybody listening today would say there's things that I can do in my institution, in my school, with my students that are really going to help them be successful as they transition to higher education, whatever their path may be. Thank you very much for joining us today, and I look forward to future conversations.